This is extremely important information. One of the most conservative tests that can be done with steel, not even fireproof, under 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, about 1,000 degrees Celsius. Well, how have other high-rises fared in fires? In Los Angeles, we have 3.5 hours burning over 5 floors. In Philadelphia, 18 hours over 8 floors. And in Caracas, Venezuela, 17 hours over 26 floors. None of these have come down due to fire. No high-rise has ever come down due to fire. And steel frame high-rises in particular. These are buildings that have come down. How? Earthquakes. They fall naturally. There's an asymmetrical massive building at the bottom. It's recognizable as a building. The concrete is not pulverized. The structural elements are not severed one from another. This is very important too. So now we have a set of buildings that have fallen naturally, that look like buildings that have fallen as opposed to what you're about to see. Now, some buildings are blown up. We have thick, billowing, enormous clouds, pyroclastic-like clouds, with unfolding cauliflower shapes produced by the incredibly hot gases released in the chemical reactions from the explosives. We have witnesses that hear explosions. They see flashes of light. We have a geometry of fireworks, a symmetrical distribution. That's what explosions do. These are key features of explosions. Of course, those explosions can be harnessed quite efficiently, put in as cutter charges in the connections to the columns and beams. And they can be severed such that they're brought down in a nice, neat pile, broken up, ready for loading and shipment, falling almost at free fall acceleration. And there's only a handful of companies that can even accomplish this level of precision in the world. One of them, by the way, was right here in the Netherlands. We're going to meet him. Now, let's take a look at some of the key characteristics of controlled demolition. We have a non-center destruction, usually at the base of the structure. We have straight down symmetrical collapse into its own footprint, usually, or however they want to engineer that. Because demolition waves remove those column supports. We have a free fall acceleration often, or almost, through the path of what was the greatest resistance, the thousands of tons of structural steel in the building, resulting in the total dismemberment of the steel structure. So it's broken up, ready for loading and shipment. Minimal damage to adjacent structures, and sounds and of explosions that witnesses hear. Flashes of light that witnesses hear. Enormous clouds of pyroclastic-like smoke with pulverized concrete. And explosive charges going off here or there. Maybe it's the wrong time or not, but they're obviously explosions. And of course, chemical evidence left behind of cutter charges, which are explosives or incendiary. Direct evidence of explosive destruction is what all 10 of these key characteristic features are. And guess what? Fire can't account for any one of them, let alone all 10 of them. Now, if you have additional corroborative evidence, like government documentation, hey, that could be helpful. That was a controlled demolition. Experts agree that's a controlled demolition. At least those experts that don't have a stake in $100,000 contracts with the federal government that might bias their opinion about whether something, like the World Trade Center, for instance, was an explosive demolition. Foreknowledge. We know these are coming down in advance because it takes months to plan and execute such an operation. Video documentation can be very helpful. Yeah, it looks like a controlled demolition. This is all proof of controlled demolition. Now, interesting thing is, we're going to apply that set of criteria to the third worst structural failure in modern history that I'm guessing, like me, most of you know nothing about, or at least those of you who already have researched it. It's a very interesting building, Building 7. If we could Raise the lights. How many of you are relatively unfamiliar with this building 7? What is this building 7? Relatively unfamiliar. Raise your hands. I'm going to say half of you. In fact, let's reverse it. How many of you are familiar? Oh my God, more of you. Okay, 2/3 familiar. 1/3. Now, I'm going to tell you about this building for a very important reason. It came down on the afternoon of 9/11. This is a 47-story skyscraper. It wasn't hit by an airplane like the 2 Twin Towers. I know it looks small relative to them, but they were the highest buildings in the world in the early 70s. On the 12th floor and the 13th floor, that's where NIST says the initiation of collapse happened. Right in this northeast corner where column 79 was. Now the problem was those fires are said to have expanded these beams on that floor. But the photographic and video evidence shows that the fires were out over an hour before the collapse. So they could not possibly have been expanding these beams, which are 5 or 6 meters long, on pushing this column off of its seat, this girder, off of its seat on this column. And that's the official story. And that this floor then fell on this one, and so on for 9 floors, leaving this column then unbraced, so it buckles. And then the entire inside of the building caves in. Now, none of that could have happened for a whole variety of reasons. First of all, these beams are fireproof. They can't ever get that hot. There's only 20 minutes of fuel in a given area. It can't heat up the beam. What does NIST do to prove their theory? In an isolated computer experiment, they heat up that beam in 2 seconds. So that it's very hot, so it's forced to expand out. It doesn't sag. It can't sag. A beam would sag, like you saw in the test results. Well, it couldn't have expanded anyway because it's tied with shear studs or pins that tie the top of the beam into the slab above, making it a composite structural system. And so NIST says, well, those shear studs broke. Well, they prove that by not heating up the concrete at all, forcing them in their computer model to break. Well, even if that could have happened, these beams could not have caused this girder to slide off of its seat, because that girder also had shear studs tying it into the slab up above, which NIST denied, but the shop drawings showed that they were there. Well, even if they weren't there, and this girder could have slid sideways, it would have had to have slid all the way off that seat. That's moving 12 inches laterally, not 5 or 6 like NIST says. Now, NIST says they got away with that because they say this flange folded after it only got halfway off of its seat. And so that's a lie, because there's structural stiffeners at the end of this girder on the shop drawings, which NIST also omitted in their computer model. So we're looking at a series of frauds here, but I'm only beginning. If this girder had fallen off of its seat on this column, these other 3 girders would have remained and held up that floor. It couldn't even have fallen. But even if they weren't there, that floor might have fallen and touched this floor, but not caused a 9-floor progressive collapse as NIST claimed. But even if that would have happened, we would have seen in a 9-floor collapse massive perimeter structural deformation and breaking of the exterior granite panels and windows, none of which you saw in those videos. So this says, well, here's their computer model. What's happening here is then this failure travels vertically, and they've got in their computer model 400 structural steel connections failing every second in order to try to show what happened to this building. But you can see it looks nothing like the reality, which is timed coincident next to it. They can't even get it to look like what actually happened in their forgery of a computer model. And it begins to tip over even, so they don't even show us what happens after 2 seconds. It's fraud from beginning to end. There would have been massive warpage, which their computer model does show, but In reality, the videos betray. Well, how do we get a building to come straight down to its own footprint? Guess what? We have to remove all 80 columns virtually at once, and on at least 8 floors, because that's the distance over which this building fell at freefall. Can fire have that level of precision? Once you answer that question, you're in trouble, serious trouble, because it results in a freefall acceleration.
Building 7 by video frame analysis. We used a magnifying glass to place markers in the corner of the building on each frame. From this we can get a data table and various graphs. The slope of this graph indicates acceleration, which is shown here to be about minus 10.279 plus or minus 0.6. Free fall on a vacuum is minus 9.8 in these units. That falls within the margin of error of this measurement. In other words, the rate of fall of building 7 in the first few seconds is indistinguishable from free fall in a vacuum.
Well, this member of AE9 11Truth confronts NIST publicly in their press conference at the release of the final report and the draft report. And NIST says, oh, you're right, it did fall at free fall, because they were denying that in the draft report. But they don't acknowledge the implication of that free fall, which it's gaining at greater distance every second, the definition of free fall. Now, let's just look at this for a second. Free fall, I'm going to drop this object. 3, 2, 1. That's free fall. Now, as fast as a bowling ball falling off this building. How can it fall at free fall? Because there's no resistance underneath. No resistance. This building had 40,000 tons of structural steel underneath it. 5 times stronger than it needed to be to hold the building up for the life. So the question again is, where did that resistance go? It's as if 8 stories were removed from the building all of a sudden, just gone instantly. Instantly. You know, not like a natural process, resulting in the total dismemberment of the steel structure. We had a moment-resisting steel frame building with columns and beams rigidly welded together. We should have seen, if in any kind of natural collapse, maybe 20 stories of building, maybe it would have tipped over, something like you see here in a natural collapse. But no, what we see is like a house of cards, completely shattered one structural steel element from another. Do we have witnesses that hear explosions?
And the whole time you hear boom, 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 boom. So, I think I know an explosion when I hear it.
And then it was like another 2-3 seconds. You heard explosions. Like, boom! It's like a distinct sound. It sounded like when the compression, like boom, 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 boom. Like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was a boom! And like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. To me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing. When we made it down to the 6th floor. Then when we made it back to the 8th floor, I heard some more explosions.
What's the sound?
Like a boom. Like an explosion.
More than one.
Yes.
We started walking down the stairs and made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor.
When we get outside, the police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run. What?
Lots of witnesses hearing explosions. How many of them made it into the final report of NIST? 0. Not one. Even explosions that you can hear, too.
Yeah, here's one of the guys you can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, look. I'm gonna call you. You want to call your mother or something?
Is there chemical evidence of explosives or incendiaries? We'll come back to this when we touch base with the Twin Towers. For now, we have all 8 key characteristics of explosive destruction, and fire can't create any one of them. Well, like this fire in World Trade Center 5, fully engulfed in flames. Did it come down? No. Mid-rise, high-rise buildings, this one I think is 9 stories, don't come down due to fire. Not steel frame, fireproof buildings for sure. Nor this in Beijing, 44 stories, fully engulfed, top to bottom. Did it come down? Nope. Here's before, here's after, slightly toasted around the edges. Put back into use. But these small fires brought this massive building, each floor of which is the size of a football field, down in just 6.5 seconds. Completely destroyed one column from another. Let's take a look at the report that came out early on, May of 2002. FEMA, they say the specifics of the fires in World Trade Center 7, how they caused the building to collapse, remain unknown at this time. Unknown. Our best hypothesis, fire plus random damage and then complete collapse, has only a low probability of occurrence. Wait a minute. What do you do when your best hypothesis has a low probability of occurrence? You go back and find another one that has a better probability. In fact, that's what they say. Further research, investigation, analysis are needed to resolve this issue. Unfortunately, though, for those hoping to resolve the issue, the evidence, the steel, was sent away starting 2 weeks after 9/11 to China for recycling, prompting Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, to cite crucial evidence that could answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately. Did it? No. What do the experts say? Well, right here in the Netherlands, 27-year controlled demolitions expert Danny Joinko. It starts from below. They've simply blown away the columns. It's a controlled demolition. Now, he says this without being told that the laptop he's watching this this collapse on, it was on 9/11. So he's saying this candidly. A team of experts did this. Professional work without a doubt. Then they say, well, did you know this happened on 9/11? No. Really? Yeah, really. It did. Well, they must have worked very fast then. He knows it takes months. You don't just plan an operation like this in an afternoon. Do we have foreknowledge of the destruction? Watch these mysterious construction workers walking away from Building 7, hearing an explosion, looking back over their shoulder, and then looking straight into the CNN camera and saying this. About to blow up, flame and debris coming down. How do they know this? What is going on here? Do fires blow up buildings? Well, here's Kevin McTaggart. We've heard him talking about explosions before. Right before that, he's hearing this. And they were all held back about 6 blocks away, listening, expecting it to come down. I mean, they were told it had structural damage. And he's listening to this radio held in the hands of a Red Cross worker, and he hears.
A few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1.
Do fires bring buildings down to countdown? What's going on here? Well, Jane Stanley of the BBC is on the job. She reports the collapse of this building 20 minutes before it even happened. That's good reporting. They apologize for this error, citing the confusing events of the day. Does this make them psychic? what is going on again? Better than that, good old America, CNN announced it that morning.
Frank joins us on the phone in Lower Manhattan, Alan.
Aaron, just 2 or 3 minutes ago, there was yet another collapse or explosion. I'm now out of sight. Good Samaritan's taking me in on Blaine Street. But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who runs by estimated that 50 stories went down. The street filled with smoke. It was like a forest fire roaring down a canyon. Now, as I think Patty Sappy and others have told you, all of Manhattan is covered, downtown Manhattan is...
50 stories went down? There was no other 50-story building that went down on 9/11. There was no other building that went down on 9/11. There were some damaged buildings, crushed some parts of buildings by the massive steel that fell when the Twin Towers went down. Had this building gone down at that time, 10:45 that morning, it would have been completely obscured by the massive dust cloud released when the Twin Towers collapsed. So we wouldn't even have video of it. So some people suggest, well, it was a dud. It was supposed to go down at that time. And that's what these construction workers were doing, for some reason, going back into the building to fix it. Well, that's speculation, but the question for us right now, relative to Building 7, is the hypothesis corroborated of explosive demolition, or is the hypothesis of fire corroborated? Do we have a sudden onset of destruction and all the other key characteristics of explosive destruction so far? Looking at the evidence for cutter charges a little bit later, is this direct evidence of explosive destruction to you? Because I'm going to ask you, can fire be one of these features? And is there additional corroborative evidence that gives you proof of controlled demolition? So if we can have the lights up, I'll ask you those 3 questions yet once again. How many of us agree with the official story that this building came down by normal office fire? Go like this so I can actually count you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Move your hands so I can see you. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Anybody over here? Go like this. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And anybody here? Anybody on the floor? What's the matter with you guys? You might be unsure. How many of you might still be unsure? There were a few before. Okay. Okay, I'll give up. There's a few of you who are unsure. How many of you think these buildings came down by controlled demolition? Okay, a greater majority. It's not majority rules here. It's science that rules. And each of us has our own interpretation of the scientific principles. And so for those of you which is the majority, in this room, you've got the biggest problem, don't you? Because what are we talking about here? We're talking about 1/3 of the destruction in the World Trade Center on 9/11. This is part of the problem of 9/11. And whether you look at it, who's in this building? Let's just take a look at this. The CIA, the IRS, the Secret Service, the Department of Defense, Mayor Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management, the Securities and Exchange Commission. The Securities and Exchange Commission, by the way, lost thousands of very valuable, irreplaceable files it was using to pursue Wall Street companies like Enron, WorldCom. So we certainly want an investigation of those fires on the 12th and 13th floor occupied by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Is it reasonable to assume that Al-Qaeda would have had access to this building to set these explosives? Probably not. This is the reason that you hear people saying this is some sort of an inside operation, which is the big problem of 9/11 for those who believe that the evidence leads them to conclude that this is a controlled demolition, right? Well, this is the reason we are educating the public in massive campaigns across the country. And on 9/11, particularly in New York, massive digital billboards. Did you know a third tower fell on 9/11? Theoretically, no one died when Building 7 came down. It was evacuated after the planes hit the towers. And so we don't have the baggage, the emotional trauma that most of us, particularly in the United States and particularly in New York, have with the Twin Towers because of the incredible loss of life there. First time we've ever been attacked in America on our mainland. And so Building 7 gives us a gateway to open our minds. And for most of you, you have to answer a few more questions as a result. And I want to help you in that process by inviting you to sign up for our monthly email newsletter. So there are 5 clipboards in this room that I asked a fine group of people to help me with. Where are those clipboards? Raise your hand and make noise. Where are my 5 clipboards? You guys went all the way over there and been looking for you. Can you bring all 5 clipboards down for me now, right now? Come on down with the 5 clipboards with all those papers on them. Stand up, walk down the stairs. This is your opportunity to shine, and everybody get a big hand. And if you kindly put one in the front of each section. Are you listening to me? Gentlemen, one in the front of each section. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections. Plus you guys. But you don't count. Not one of you believes the officials. Okay. 5 clipboards, 5 sections, and guess what? There's actually 6 sections. Guess what? I have a 6th clipboard. Do you have all 5 clipboards with you? How many clipboards do you have in your hand? I can't hear you, sorry. Where are the 5 clipboards that I gave you guys? I can't even believe this. No wonder the Spanish were so tough on you guys. Well, I've got 2. Can you split those up for me and start one on each of these sections? Sign the clipboards downstairs on your way out if you'd like to be on our email newsletter list. So, and you can go to our website too, by the way. If that's just, if you want to stay in touch with us, we'll give you the latest evidence and so forth. We also, you can be a member for €2 or €5 per month. You can be a member of AE9 11Truth. We are a non-profit organization. We only are able to spread the information about the World Trade Center towers with your help. We've got a lot of work to do. Now, we have made a film which is extraordinary. We have 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, not just me, laying out all of this evidence in 90 minutes. So here's the film. You only have to see 4 minutes.